Welcome back to Vaulted World Secrets. And if this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found us. Thank you so much for spending your time with me tonight. Before we get into it, have you ever had an animal look at you like it already knew what you were going to do before you did it? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's get into it. Here is a fact that will sit in the back of your mind for the rest of the night. In ancient Egypt, killing a cat, even by accident, was punishable by death. Not a fine, not exile, death. There are documented accounts from Greek historians, cross referenced with Demotic legal papyri, describing Egyptian citizens who were torn apart by mobs in the street simply for accidentally running over a cat with a cart. Roman soldiers stationed along the Nile Delta were briefed, specifically and in writing, not to touch the animals under any circumstances, because the diplomatic fallout from a single dead cat could unravel a military alliance faster than any battlefield defeat. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BC, describes witnessing this himself. A Roman officer whose cartwheel had struck a cat was killed by a crowd before any official authority could intervene. The Roman government chose not to pursue the matter. The cat was the point. When a household cat died of natural causes, the entire family shaved their eyebrows in mourning and fasted until the eyebrows grew back. When a cat died in a fire, the priority was recovering the body before fighting the fire itself. Hundreds of thousands of cats were mummified. Not casually, individually wrapped in geometrically precise linen bandages, their faces preserved behind stylized bronze masks cast with the specific expression of a deity receiving supplication, not sleeping, not peaceful, but attentive, present. Each body arranged in the crouching position that Egyptian iconography associates with Bastet in her aspect as the waiting protector. Forelegs forward, hindquarters settled, eyes forward. The same position a cat assumes when it is watching something that has not yet moved. They were placed in vaults, sealed chambers, mass necropolises carved from the living limestone and calcite beneath the desert floor, some extending 20 meters or more beneath the surface, some dated by archaeologists to periods 3,000 years before the Common Era, some dated to periods for which we have no certain chronology at all. At the city of Bubastis, ancient Bastet, the House of the Cat, there was a temple complex dedicated to the goddess Bastet that stood continuously for over 3,000 years. Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited in the 5th century BC, called it the most beautiful temple in all of Egypt. He described the surrounding city as lower than the temple itself, so that the building seemed to rise from an island, visible from all directions, surrounded by 2 channels of the Nile. Inside it and beneath it, running through the limestone geology of the eastern delta like the root system of something enormous and old, there were tunnels. Nobody fully mapped those tunnels until 1994. I was the person they sent to do it. My name is Dr. Nadia Ostrowski. I was, at the time, 37 years old. I had spent 14 years in field archaeology, the majority of it in the eastern Nile Delta. I had a professional reputation for being methodical, unflappable, and correct in my assessments. I do not write that with pride. I write it so that you understand the weight of what follows. That what I am about to describe is not the product of an overactive imagination, a first-timer's jittery nerves, or the impressionistic fever dreaming that occasionally afflicts graduate students on their first deep site excavation. I am a person trained in the rigorous documentation of physical reality. I have spent my career insisting on the primacy of what can be measured, what can be photographed, what can be cited. I still insist on all of that. The events I am about to describe are documented, photographed, and cited within this journal. That they do not fit any rational framework I have been able to construct in the 30 years since they occurred does not, in my view, make them less real. It makes them more important to record. I have now filed 9 anomalous incident reports in my career. Before this assignment, that number was 0. This journal covers the first 3 weeks of fieldwork at the Bubastis necropolis specifically the lower catacomb complex accessed via the subterranean entry shaft at the eastern precinct. Grid reference BE947 through BE9422. What I found there has been classified by the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities under their restricted archaeology provisions and sealed by the Polish-Egyptian Archaeological Consortium's internal review board under case reference PECAT 19947. I am releasing this transcript without authorization. I am doing so because I believe the classification exists not to protect the public from distressing information. It exists to protect the funding. There is a difference, and it matters enormously. Read carefully. There are details in here that the official report omits, not because they are uncertain, but because the review board decided, without consulting me, that they were unpublishable. I left them out of the official filing originally because I needed to remain employable. I have since retired. My employability is no longer the point. The record is the point. The record and the warning embedded in it. The site at Tel Basta, the modern name for ancient Bubastis, sits approximately 80 kilometers northeast of Cairo in Egypt's Sharqiya Governorate. You approach it along a flat, dusty road that passes through the kind of ordinary Egyptian town that has grown up around and partially over the ancient precinct apartment buildings, a petrol station, a small, covered market, until the road curves, and the land opens eastward into an undeveloped field of pale scrub and low limestone ridges, and you see the first exposed blocks of the temple complex, and you understand, immediately and physically, that you are in the presence of something that was once vast. The temple precinct of Bastet covered an area of roughly 12 hectares at its height. Today, most of it is buried or built over. What remains visible is enough to establish the scale of what was here. Pink granite columns still standing, inscribed with the cartouches of pharaohs spanning 1,000 years of continuous rule. Granite floor slabs the size of dining tables, worn smooth by 3,000 years of pilgrims' feet. The outline of the sacred lake, now dry, its limestone banks still intact. Herodotus was right. Even ruined, even half swallowed by a modern town, it is one of the most beautiful sites I have ever worked. Our team arrived on September the 3rd, 1994. We were 6 archaeologists, 2 geophysics technicians, and 4 local workmen. We established base camp on the eastern edge of the precinct, where the land was still open canvas canopies, folding aluminum tables, a generator, a refrigeration unit for the equipment that required it, and individual sleeping tents arranged in a double row. Our objective, on paper, was precisely defined. The subterranean passages running beneath the eastern precinct had been partially investigated in the 1950s, and again in 1972, but both attempts had stalled, the first due to permit complications, the second due to a partial roof collapse that injured 2 workers and prompted an immediate halt to all below-ground activity. Our consortium had secured both funding and ministry permits for a comprehensive GPR survey of the eastern complex and, in sections where structural integrity permitted, a physical walkthrough documentation with full photographic and dimensional record. My second in command was a man I will call Tamash. That was his actual name, and he has given his consent for its use in this document. He was a geophysics specialist from Warsaw, 32 years old, with a methodical intelligence that I found immediately reassuring. He approached every problem as an engineering challenge. Define the variables, select the appropriate instrument, measure, record, conclude. I liked him very much. He was exactly the kind of person you want beside you when you are going underground. Our Egyptian co-director and ministry liaison was a woman named Amira. She was approximately 45 years old, though I never confirmed this, and she possessed the particular kind of authority that does not require a raised voice or a formal declaration. She was at the site when we arrived, standing at the eastern entry shaft with a hand-drawn map she had made herself, in Arabic, with annotations in a dense personal shorthand that she translated for us selectively over the following days. She had worked Bubastis before, She had been part of the 1989 surface survey and had spent time as a student on the precinct in the early 1970s. She knew this site the way you know a house you grew up in, by feel, by the particular quality of its silences, by the places you did not go, without reason. She gave us our initial briefing on the evening of September the 4th, by kerosene lamp at one of the folding tables, with the map spread between us and glasses of mint tea. She walked us through the known passage network with the brisk efficiency of someone who had given this briefing before, marked the 1972 collapse zone in red, identified the two sections of uncertain structural integrity that required her specific sign-off before entry, and then looked at both of us and said, "Buddy system below the surface at all times. No solo descents, no exceptions." She looked at me when she said no exceptions. She had read my file. I had gone ahead alone at Saqqara in 1989, at Amarna in 1991, and at a secondary Delta site in 1993. All three times I had found something significant. All three times I had nearly had something very bad happen to me. "I understand," I told her. "I need you to do more than understand," she said. "I need you to comply." She also told us, before she rolled up the map, to carry salt. Small muslin bags of coarse, unprocessed salt, sourced from the local market, one per person, in a vest pocket at all times below the surface. Tomasz looked at his bag with the polite, carefully neutral expression of a scientist receiving folk medicine. "For what purpose?" he asked. "Tradition," she said, in a tone that ended the conversation. I pocketed my salt without comment. I had worked enough Delta sites to have learned that the traditions maintained by people who had worked those soils for generations were rarely without foundation, even when the original rationale had been lost to time. The equipment we staged for the survey was comprehensive. Primary lighting was Petzl headlamps, rechargeable, high output, reliable in confined spaces, with Israeli-made oil lamps as backup. The oil lamps were a ministry permit requirement. Their flames provided a reliable passive indicator of oxygen depletion, useful in passages where air supply was uncertain. The lamps also provided something that no battery-powered light source does: a flame that responds to the movement of air, that bends and stretches and dims in ways that carry information. Beyond lighting, we carried the Leica Total Station for three-dimensional spatial mapping, chalk markers and surveying tape, a handheld air quality monitor calibrated for oxygen, carbon dioxide, and several common subterranean gases, photographic equipment, my personal Nikon F4 with a selection of lenses, and a portable flash unit triple redundant field notebooks. And a first aid kit waited for the specific hazards of confined limestone work, crush injuries, respiratory incidents, and the deep, bone-level cold that sets in below 10 meters, regardless of the surface temperature above. The first 3 days underground were professionally extraordinary and personally one of the finest experiences of my career. The passages were everything I had hoped: extensive, well-preserved, layered with evidence of construction across multiple distinct historical periods. The main eastern corridor dated by stylistic analysis to the late period, broadly the 7th through 4th centuries BC, but in the deeper sections the construction changed character significantly. The stonework became more precise, more intimate with the natural geology, and the reliefs shifted from the formal hieratic style of the late period into something older and more direct. I estimated a construction date of at least 1,000 years earlier for those deepest sections, potentially the Middle Kingdom, potentially earlier still. The cats were everywhere. I do not mean this metaphorically. From the moment of entry into the main catacomb level, every surface that was not a passage floor or structural support was devoted to the burial of cats. Niches carved at regular intervals, floor to ceiling, in both walls, each containing 1, 2, or 3 mummified cat forms, each wrapped in linen bandaging that had survived 3,000 years in a state of remarkable preservation, each wearing a bronze face mask cast in the stylized likeness of Bastet. Tomasz estimated, by the end of day 3, that the eastern complex we had surveyed so far contained burial niches sufficient for approximately 50,000 individual cats. 50,000. Some were small, kitten-sized, the bronze masks miniaturized in proportion, their linen wrappings the length of my hand. Others were large, the mummies the full length of my forearm, their masks cast with an expression I struggled to describe accurately in my field notes. Not sleeping, not peaceful. The word I kept returning to, and kept crossing out because it was not a scientific term, was present. The masks looked present, alert and still, in the way that a cat is alert and still, not passive, but collected, conserving attention for the moment it becomes necessary. The smell of the passages was distinctive. Not the expected smell of deep, undisturbed limestone, that dry, mineral neutrality with no biological component at all. This was different. There was a warmth to it, faint but persistent, an organic undertone, not decay, not the ammonia of ancient biological material breaking down. Something more immediate than that. I wrote in my field notebook on day 1, air quality note, organic element, source unclear, non-threatening. I did not write what it reminded me of. I knew, but I did not want to write it, because writing it would make it a data point, and making it a data point would require me to explain it, and I could not explain it. It smelled like a room that a living cat had recently vacated. The warm, slightly musky, entirely specific smell of a lived-in animal presence. In a passage sealed for 3,000 years, 20 meters beneath the surface of the eastern delta, containing 50,000 mummified remains. There was also, from those first descents onward, a low-frequency background presence in the deeper passages below the 15-meter level, a continuous, unvarying hum. I logged it on day 1 as probable geological, the settlement resonance of limestone under pressure, or the distant movement of groundwater through the delta geology, and then stopped noticing it entirely, the way you stop noticing the sound of a refrigerator in a room you spend enough time in. It was simply there, consistent, low, part of the baseline. I would not think about it again until September the 8th, when it changed. On the morning of September the 8th, Tomasz completed his full GPR pass of the lower catacomb grid, and we sat together at the mapping table to review the radar returns. Most of what the data showed matched the existing survey records from the 1950s. The branching passage network, the approximate chamber dimensions, the 2 sections of structural weakness near the collapse zone, all consistent. But there was one return that was not consistent with anything on record. Deep in the eastern complex, at a point the total station placed at approximately 22 meters below the current surface, the GPR showed a return signature indicating an open space. Not a passage, a chamber. Roughly circular, the radar estimated, approximately 7 meters in diameter, with a ceiling height between 2 and 3 meters. There were no connecting passages on any existing map, no entrance, no exit. The chamber simply existed in the data, sealed on all sides, 22 meters down. Amira studied the printout for a long time without speaking. She moved her finger along the boundary of the anomaly, tracing it twice. The 1972 collapse was here, she said, marking a point roughly 8 meters north of the anomaly then, with the ease of someone who had referred to it so many times the year had dropped away. The 72 collapse. If there is an entrance, it was most likely compromised. She left her hand resting on the printout. We approached the collapse zone for structural assessment. We do not attempt access to the chamber until I have reviewed the data and signed off. We agreed and went back underground. The descent to the lower complex took approximately 20 minutes at a careful pace. The passage narrowed significantly below the 12-meter level, dropping to single-file width, the ceiling low enough that I had to maintain a duck walk for an unbroken stretch of roughly 40 meters that did damage to my knees and my composure. I had worked tighter spaces. The discomfort was not the problem. The problem, or the first indication of a problem, the first data point that my professional framework struggled to absorb, was the sound. On the morning of the 8th, at approximately 15 meters depth, the hum was different. It was louder, not dramatically, but perceptibly, and its character had changed in a way I found difficult to describe clinically. Where before it had been continuous, a single, unvarying tone, it was now rhythmic, periodic. It pulsed at approximately once per second, very slightly irregular, the kind of irregularity that is not mechanical but biological. Tomasz stopped walking. I walked into his back. We stood there for a moment, both listening. "Ventilation somewhere," he said, but he said it in the tone of someone proposing a hypothesis they don't fully believe. "There's no forced ventilation below level 1, I said. "Natural. A gap in the limestone. A gap that produces a regular biological rhythm." He didn't answer. He took out his air monitor and checked it. Normal readings, all levels. He recorded the time, the depth, and a description of the sound. He wrote, in his precise technical handwriting, "Low-frequency rhythmic acoustic event, biological cadence, source unlocated, no air quality concern." He did not say out loud what it sounded like. I did not say it either. I was thinking the word purring. I was thinking it the way you think something you don't want to acknowledge firmly, specifically, and in direct contradiction of your own professional judgment. We continued to the junction point designated BE9411, the furthest point of our planned survey for that day, and it was there that we found the first thing that was entirely and unambiguously wrong. The chalk survey markers we had placed on the walls during our September the 6th descent had been altered, not removed. Altered. We had placed directional arrows at each junction to indicate the route back to the surface, in a standard safety precaution for any passage network where disorientation is possible. Two of the arrows, specifically the two at junction BE9411, controlling the choice between the main passage and an unmarked side passage, had been rotated, precisely rotated, 90 degrees clockwise, so that instead of pointing toward the exit, they pointed directly into the unmarked side passage. I stood in front of those arrows for a long time. "Did anyone come down here since the 6th? I asked Tomasz. "The local workmen stay above level 2, he said. "They're very consistent about that, and the rest of the team was on the surface grid yesterday, so." Neither of us had an answer. I photographed both arrows in their altered state, photographed the surrounding wall, photographed the junction approach from both directions. Then I corrected them. As I was completing the second arrow, I looked into the side passage the altered markers had been directing us toward. The passage was dark. My headlamp only penetrated about 4 meters before the angle of the turn cut off the beam, but the floor was visible in the lamp's reach. And on the floor, in the thin film of pale calcite dust that coated the limestone, the kind of undisturbed dust that accumulates over years and records any disturbance with forensic precision, there was a trail. Cat paw prints. A trotting gait, 4-beat, evenly spaced, consistent pace. Heading deeper into the side passage. Clear, fresh, sharp-edged, recent. Within the last 24 hours, certainly, possibly much more recently, there were no prints heading back. I photographed them. Tomasz crouched beside me and photographed them separately. We measured the pad width approximately 3 centimeters, consistent with a medium to large domestic cat. Then we looked at each other in the way that two scientists look at each other when the data is unambiguous and the implications are something neither of them wants to be the first to say out loud. "Cats enter archaeological sites," I said, to myself as much as to him. "There are documented instances. Rodents draw them. Organic material in the burials." "The entrance shaft is 40 centimeters square at its narrowest," Tomasz said. "A cat could manage it." Yes, we were both speaking very carefully, in the manner of people constructing a rational explanation, with the full awareness that they are constructing it. I know this is a survival skill. I also know exactly when it stops being one. I made a note in my field journal. I took the long route back to the surface, the route that did not require me to pass through junction BE9411 again. I told myself this was because the alternative route saved time. It did not save time. It added 11 minutes to the ascent. I knew this and went that way anyway, and I wrote in my journal that night that the smell in the lower passages had been stronger than usual. and that I had not been able to eat dinner until I had sat outside the tent in the open air for 45 minutes, looking at the stars, confirming through physical sensation that I was above ground and the sky was above me, and the weight of 22 meters of limestone was not pressing down from all sides. I want to be precise about what happened next, because this is the section of the record most likely to be dismissed, and precision is my only protection against dismissal. I am going to describe 4 events that occurred between September the 9th and September the 12th. I am going to describe them in sequence with full contextual detail, and I am not going to interpret them. Interpretation is for people who were not there. I was there. My job is documentation. On the morning of September the 9th, one of the local workmen, a man named Yusuf, who had worked Bubastis sites for 15 years, who was reliable, experienced, and not in any way given to theatrical displays of superstition, refused to enter the lower complex at the start of the working day. He did not argue about it. He set his equipment bag down at the lip of the entry shaft, looked down into it for a moment, and said something in Arabic that Amira translated for me that evening. The ones below are awake. He went back to the surface grid without further discussion and worked there for the rest of the survey without incident. I asked Amira what the phrase meant in context. She told me it was local idiom, something workers around active dig sites used when a site had been disturbed in a way they didn't like. She said it without emphasis, in the tone of someone providing a neutral anthropological data point. Then I asked if she had heard it before. She paused. She poured more tea. Once, she said, at Saqqara, in 1986, a team had located a sealed subsidiary chamber not in any existing record. When they opened it, there was evidence of previous opening from the inside. The seal stones showed tool marks consistent with being moved outward from within the sealed chamber into the passage. I asked what had been inside. Cats, she said. The mummified remains of approximately 200 cats, all positioned with their faces oriented toward the seal stones. The official report noted a possible structural disturbance during seismic activity as the probable cause of the seal displacement. And the unofficial view? She looked at me steadily. The team finished their survey and left. Yusuf was part of that team. She did not say anything further on the subject. On September the 11th, I was working alone on the main catacomb level, not the lower complex, the upper section, fully within protocol, conducting a detailed photographic record of the mummy niches on the northern wall. I had been at it for approximately 3 hours, working systematically from west to east, photographing each niche in sequence. Full niche, individual mummies, detail of bandaging, detail of bronze mask. Slow, absorbing, careful work. I had photographed niche 47 at approximately 10:43 a.m. The niche contained 3 mummified cats, 2 arranged side by side, lying horizontal, 1 positioned vertically against the back wall, its forelegs folded forward, mask facing outward. I noted their orientations: 2 horizontal, north facing, 1 vertical, west facing. Standard documentation. I moved on. At approximately 11:20 a.m., I returned to that section of wall to photograph a detail I had missed. When I raised my camera to niche 47, I stopped. All 3 cats were facing east. The 2 horizontal cats had been rotated approximately 90 degrees. The vertical cat had been turned entirely around so that what had been its back was now facing outward. I lowered my camera. I stood in front of that niche for what I estimate was about 4 minutes. I checked my photographs. My timestamp confirmed that at 10:43 a.m., they had been facing north and west. It was now 11:22 a.m. In the 39 minutes between those 2 times, something had rearranged the contents of that niche. I had not touched them. My protocol explicitly prohibited physical contact with burial material. I had not touched them. I examined the niches on either side, undisturbed. I examined the floor for evidence of seismic vibration. Nothing. I checked my air monitor. Normal. I photographed the niche, as it now appeared, and noted the discrepancy with full timestamps. And then I sat down on the passage floor because my legs had become unreliable in a way I was not accustomed to, and I needed to wait for them to become reliable again before I attempted the ascent. That evening, I told no one. I know this was wrong. I am documenting it here as an error in professional judgment, compounded by the kind of ego protection that makes a person reluctant to report something they know will make them sound unhinged. I was the expedition director. I could not afford to sound unhinged. I was also, in the privacy of my own mind, profoundly frightened for the first time in my field career, and fear does not always produce rational decision making in otherwise rational people. On the morning of September the 12th, the rhythmic sound had changed again. Louder by a perceptible margin, and its rhythm had accelerated closer to twice per second now with a quality that was less mechanical and more urgent, and it was no longer a single sound. It had split into layers. Multiple rhythms, each at a slightly different frequency, slightly offset from one another in their timing, overlapping and interweaving the way that multiple sound sources, in a confined space, overlap when the acoustics allow the sounds to blend. It was the sound, and I am going to write this clearly and without qualification, it was the sound of many animals purring simultaneously, many large animals, more animals than the size of the passage could contain. The sound appeared to come from the walls as well as from the lower passages, from the niches, from the mummies in the niches. Tomasz and I stopped at the 15-meter mark. We stood very still. We should not go further today, he said. No, I agreed. He recorded the sound characteristics on the data log and wrote in his field notebook, multi-source rhythmic vocalization, significant amplitude increase from previous observations, distributed apparent origin, including lateral wall surfaces, interval consistent with feline purr response at elevated arousal state. He wrote feline purr response in his careful scientific handwriting at approximately 9:15 a.m. on September the 12th, 1994. He initialed it. He has never, in the 30 years since, spoken about it publicly. I understand why. We went back to the surface. That afternoon, we found the entrance to the undocumented chamber. It was not in the collapse zone north of the GPR anomaly, as Amira had theorized. It was in the side passage at junction BE9411. The passage, the altered arrow markers, had been directing us toward 3 days earlier. Following the paw print trail, which was still visible in the calcite dust undisturbed, as I had confirmed, because no member of the survey team had re-entered that side passage since the 8th, we went 60 meters down, the side passage before the passage turned, descended sharply, and opened into a low, wide antechamber. The total station later confirmed we had reached 22 meters below the current surface, the precise depth of the GPR anomaly Tomasz had flagged 4 days earlier. The horizontal distance of the passage and the vertical depth were simply different measurements of the same destination. At the back of the antechamber was an arch. Carved limestone, its keystone bearing the raised relief of a seated cat, not Bastet in her human-bodied form, but a pure animal, a cat depicted as itself, without divine accoutrement, looking directly outward from the stone. Across the arch, fitted into a floor channel with engineering precision that spoke of either extraordinary skill or extraordinary patience, was a rectangular limestone block, approximately 60 centimeters thick. No mortar, no cement, fitted, seated. By later calculation, its weight was 342 kilograms. It was not fully seated. Somewhere in the last 72 hours, the block had moved. Not been moved. I am choosing that phrasing carefully. It had moved approximately 4 centimeters inward along its floor channel, leaving a gap at the top of the arch between the block's upper surface and the keystone 4 centimeters wide. Warm air moved through the gap continuously, outward, the warmth of something occupied, something inhabited, something alive. I held my oil lamp near the gap. The flame bent sharply toward it and then recoiled. I have never seen a flame behave that way. simultaneously attracted and repelled, and I have no technical explanation for it. Tomash's air monitor read normal oxygen, slightly elevated carbon dioxide, trace organic compounds. The monitor described only as biogenic animal source. At the base of the block, in the calcite dust, the paw prints led to the gap and disappeared into it. There were no prints on our side of the block leading back out. I pressed my palm flat against the face of the block. The limestone was warm, not ambient temperature, not the residual warmth of geological depth. Warm the way a stone is warm when something living has been lying against the other side of it for a very long time. I took my hand away. "We get a mirror," I said. Tomasz said, "Yes." Amira's reaction to the shifted block was the thing that finally broke through my professional composure, and I want to explain precisely what I mean. It was not that she showed fear. She showed no fear at all, and the absence of fear in a person who had just been shown an impossibility was itself more frightening to me than any more obvious reaction would have been. She was not surprised. When I led her and Tomasz down to the antechamber on the morning of the 13th and showed her the gap and the displaced dust and the warm block and the paw prints with no return tracks, she looked at all of it in sequence with the expression of a person reviewing a situation they have prepared for. Not relaxed, not casual, resolved. She opened her vest pocket. She removed her muslin salt bag, her own, the one she had carried since day one. She handed it to me and told me to keep it visible, in my hand. She handed Tomasz his and told him the same. She kept nothing for herself. I understood later that she did not need it. What she carried was older and more specific than salt. Then she approached the block. She placed her right palm flat against its face. She spoke quietly, in Arabic. I asked her afterward to write down what she had said, and she gave me a transcript I have had translated several times. All translations arrived at roughly the same rendering. I come with clean hands and an honest account. What is yours remains yours. I disturb nothing that has not been offered. I address the guardians of this boundary with the respect owed to those who have held it longer than I have lived. It was, all my translators agreed, very formal, very old. The grammatical forms she was using were not modern Arabic. They drew on a register associated with classical and Quranic usage, language associated with formal address to something of significant authority. She stood back from the block. There was a pause, perhaps 10 seconds, in which nothing happened, and the warm air continued to move through the gap, and the layered purring sound was present, faint but present, from somewhere beneath and around us. Then the block moved. I am going to describe this as precisely as I can, because precision is the only tool I have left. The block moved inward along its floor channel. It moved smoothly, without grinding, without scraping, without the sound of stone on stone. It moved with the settled, deliberate ease of something that knows exactly where it is going, following a channel it has traveled before. It moved approximately 30 centimeters in total, which was enough to open the arch to passage width. It came to rest with a sound that was not a thud or a grind, but something softer, the sound of a carefully placed object settling into its correct resting position. No one was on the other side. The arch was solid darkness, and the block had moved because Amira had spoken to it, and I was standing 3 meters back with a muslin bag of salt pressed so hard into my palm that the cloth was cutting the skin. And I was not afraid in the ordinary sense of that word. I was experiencing something that did not have a word in my language. Something between awe and the specific physical terror of realizing that the world is larger and more occupied than you had been told. Amira did not cross the threshold. She stood at the arch and she spoke into the darkness of the chamber beyond. The same formal register, longer this time, 3 distinct passages in it. The declaration, translated with some variation by my different translators, meant, approximately, what was taken is accounted for, what is owed is acknowledged. The boundary between your world and ours holds. We have come to confirm the holding, not to breach it. And then the darkness responded. not with a voice, not with any sound that could be transcribed. The darkness in the chamber rearranged itself. That is the only language I have for it. The darkness had been even and uniform, and then it was not. It was textured, layered, gathered at certain points into a concentration of stillness that was different in quality from the stillness of empty space. The concentration had shape, low, elongated, the shape of something crouching in the darkness, the shape of something with patience so old that patience had become its native state, and there were eyes. I will not specify how many pairs. I will not describe their color beyond saying that they caught the oil lamplight the way cat eyes catch light from within, converting a small external source into something that seems to generate its own illumination. They were at different heights, some very low, near the floor, some at mid-level, two pairs near the ceiling, which made no structural sense, and which I have been trying to rationalize for 3 decades without success. They were patient. They were observing us with the concentrated attention of things that have been observing for a very long time and have learned that observation, sustained and complete, is its own form of power. I held the salt. Amira spoke a final phrase, translated, "What is here remains here. The threshold is honored. The darkness unfolded." Smoothly, without urgency, the concentrated shapes dispersed into the general dark. The eyes withdrew one by one, not as if retreating, but as if choosing to become less present. The distinction feels important, and I cannot explain why. The quality of the darkness in the chamber changed from occupied to merely dark. The block moved back. Same smooth motion, same careful sound of correct settlement. The gap closed to 4 centimeters and stopped. The block did not fully reseat itself. 4 centimeters remained. Enough for warm air to continue moving outward. Enough to remind us that the boundary was held from the inside, and the inside chose whether the gap closed completely. "We leave now," Amira said. "We do not return to this level today. We left. I did not sleep on the nights of the 13th or 14th. I lay in my sleeping bag, applying every rational framework I possessed. Bioluminescence, infrasound-induced hallucination, mass psychogenic response, geological gas seepage, the acoustics of deep limestone creating perceptual distortions. I could not make any of it fit around the block. The block defeated every framework I applied. It weighed 342 kilograms. It moved. It moved in response to a woman's spoken address. It moved back. The framework that could absorb that fact did not exist in my professional training, and I have never found it in any literature since. On the evening of September the 14th, I asked Amira to tell me what she knew. She was quiet for longer than was comfortable. Then she said Bubastis was the center of Bastet's cult for over 3,000 years. The Bubastis festival was the largest in Egypt. Herodotus estimated that more wine was consumed here, at this one annual festival, than at all other Egyptian religious celebrations combined. 700,000 pilgrims, some years more, for 3,000 years, without interruption. When a place holds that much devotion, that much sustained attention and reverence, for that long, something accumulates. The Egyptians understood this. They were not building the vaults beneath the temple for storage. They were building a home for the goddess's instruments. "The cats," I said. "The cats," she agreed. Not sacred because of a legal decree, sacred because of what they did. They killed the serpents that came in the night to destroy the grain. They killed the scorpions in the bedchambers. They killed the venomous things that moved in darkness and took children in their sleep. They watched the boundary between the safe world and the dangerous one, and they held it, and they were compensated for this service with worship and linen and bronze and the tears of the families who mourned them. 50,000 individual payments, each one wrapped, each one masked, each one placed in a house carved from the stone. 3,000 years of payments. She drank her tea. When the temple fell, when the worship ended, when Rome absorbed Egypt and the old contracts were voided by people who did not understand they were contracts, the service did not stop. The boundary still needed to be held. There was simply no one left who knew how to pay. I thought about the warm air moving through the 4 centimeter gap, about the eyes at different heights, about the paw prints that entered the passage and did not return. How long has it been like this? I asked. How long since the last payment? The temple fell in the 3rd century of the Common Era, she said. Roughly. 1700 years of unpaid service. 1700 years of maintaining a boundary between the world above the limestone and whatever the cats of Bubastis were keeping on the other side of it. 1700 years of being unacknowledged, uncompensated, and still working. The warning signs, I said, the arrows, the repositioned mummies, the paw prints, those were communications. They were telling you where to look, Amira said, and they were telling you to look carefully, not to blunder through. They wanted acknowledgement, not intrusion. There is a significant difference. And the words you spoke, how do you know them? She was quiet. My grandmother, she said finally, and her grandmother before her. There are women in the families of this region who have kept those words for 1700 years, passing them from mother to daughter, so that when the archaeologists came, and they always come, there would be someone who knew how to stand at the boundary and speak correctly. That night I lay awake with a completely different quality of wakefulness than I had experienced the previous 2 nights. Not the desperate wakefulness of a person trying to dismantle what they had seen. Something more settled. Something that felt uncomfortably like understanding. The next morning, September the 15th, a junior researcher, whose name I am omitting, went underground alone at 5:30 a.m. He was 26 years old, brilliant and ambitious. On the evening of September the 14th, while Amira and I spoke at the camp table after dinner, he had been working at the equipment station 2 meters behind us, close enough to hear everything. I did not know this until afterward. He had overheard enough of our conversation to believe that we were sitting on the archaeological discovery of the decade, which was accurate, and that the business with the block and the darkness and the eyes was a collective, dissociative episode brought on by confined spaces, carbon dioxide fluctuation, and the power of suggestion, which was not accurate. He took his headlamp. He took his notebook. He did not take his salt bag, because he had emptied it on day 1 of the survey, finding it a quaint superstition taking up pocket space. He went down through the entry shaft, through the main catacomb level, through the narrowing lower passage, down the descent to the antechamber, and he approached the sealed arch. He tried to move the block with a pry tool. I know all of this because of his notebook, which we found on the floor of the antechamber 2 meters from the arch, open to the last page of his notes. The notes stop in the middle of a sentence. The sentence reads, low-frequency sound, very loud now, multiple sources. The walls themselves are vibrating, and I can feel it in my teeth and my chest. I can see through the gap. There's something right at the gap. It was not there a moment ago, I can see. And the pen line trails off the page. He was found at the surface, at the base of the entry shaft, at approximately 6:15 a.m. by one of the local workmen. He was sitting with his back against the wall and both palms pressed flat against the limestone on either side of him, as if he needed the contact with solid stone to confirm that the world was real and he was in it. His headlamp was still on, pointed at nothing. He was physically unharmed. He was completely silent. He did not speak for 11 days. When he did, it was functional. He could communicate basic needs, answer questions about logistics. He could not discuss the lower complex. When anyone raised the subject, directly or indirectly, he repeated the same phrase in a flat, careful voice. Don't open it, don't open it, don't open it. We arranged his evacuation to Cairo on the afternoon of September the 15th. He left the site in a ministry vehicle, and I have not seen him since. I have made indirect inquiries over the years. He is well, I am told. He no longer works in archaeology. He teaches secondary school mathematics in a city I will not name, and by all accounts, he is a good and patient teacher, and he does not, as far as I can establish, go underground. At approximately 2 p.m. on September the 16th, approximately 32 hours after his unauthorized entry, the sound from the lower complex stopped, not faded, stopped. One moment it was present, a background presence we had all stopped consciously hearing, and the next moment the passages were acoustically inert in the way that sealed limestone is inert, perfectly, neutrally silent, without any biological component at all. Tomas checked the air monitor, and all readings were normal. Amira descended alone, carrying her salt and her old words, and was gone for 41 minutes. When she came back, she said the block was fully seated, not the 4 centimeter position we had seen every day since the 8th, but fully closed, flush with the arch on all sides, as if it had never been ajar. It had not been fully closed at any point since our arrival. Whatever was inside had chosen, in response to the unauthorized intrusion, to close the gap entirely, not as a consequence of his pry tool, as a decision. She said the antechamber was undisturbed, and the paw prints on the floor had been smoothed away, as if the dust had been carefully, deliberately leveled. She said it the way a person says something they need to believe is finished. I am not sure it is finished. I am not sure it was ever the kind of thing that finishes. We completed our surface documentation over the following 4 days and closed the dig on September the 20th. The GPR data was submitted to the ministry. The undocumented chamber appears in our official report as a probable Roman period sealed votive deposit, access not recommended due to structural instability. The air quality data, the sound measurements, the repositioned mummies, the altered arrow markers, and the paw prints with no return tracks are not in the official report. They are here. I am filing what follows as an addendum to the internal record items that fall outside the scope of standard archaeological reporting, but which I consider both professionally and historically significant, and which I believe have direct implications for any future work at this or similar sites. The undocumented chamber at grid reference BE9419 should not be excavated, opened, or physically accessed by any survey methodology. The GPR data is sufficient for academic publication. Any physical engagement with the sealed arch must be preceded by extended consultation with Egyptian scholars specializing in the late period Bubastite cult tradition, and conducted exclusively with the participation of Amira as co-director. I want to be explicit. I do not mean a person with similar qualifications. I mean Amira specifically, because she carries knowledge transmitted to her by lineage and cannot be acquired by study. The salt carried by all team members should be understood not as an anthropological curiosity or a gesture of cultural respect, but as documented protective practice with observed outcomes. The mechanism is unknown to me. The outcome is documented. The team member who dispensed with his salt on day 1 was the team member who entered the lower complex alone and was found mute at the surface. The team members who carried their salt consistently are all present, employed, and psychologically intact. On the night of September the 19th, my final night at base camp before demobilization, I was woken at approximately 3 a.m. by nothing I could identify. No sound, no movement, no physical disturbance. My tent was closed. The zipper was in its original position. I reached for my headlamp and turned it on and checked the interior of the tent. On the canvas floor beside my sleeping bag, placed with a neatness that could not be accounted for by accident or wind, was my muslin salt bag. I had kept it in my vest pocket throughout the survey. The vest was hanging from the tent's internal frame hook. The salt bag was not in the vest pocket. It was on the floor beside my sleeping bag, empty, tied shut. I do not know what it means. I have spent 30 years considering the possibilities. A warning, an acknowledgement, a gesture of respect from something that understood the language of the original exchange and chose to communicate within it, or something for which I do not have a framework and may never develop one. The cats of Bubastis performed their contracted function for 3,000 years without interruption. The function was specific. They held the boundary between the world above the limestone and whatever moves on the other side of it. They killed the physical venomous things, the cobras, the scorpions, the vipers, and they also, by every indication embedded in 3,000 years of Egyptian religious documentation, held something back that was not a physical serpent. They were paid in reverence and linen and bronze and the tears of families who shaved their eyebrows and fasted. When the payment stopped, the function did not. In a sealed chamber 22 meters below a scrub field in the eastern delta of Egypt, in the dark that is warmer than the surrounding limestone, something is still working, still watching, still holding the boundary against something that was moving in the dark long before Egypt existed, and will be moving in the dark long after everything we have built has dissolved back into sand. It has been at this since before the first pharaoh drew breath. It will be at this when the last one of us is gone. The Ministry Review Board asked me, at my debriefing in Cairo, whether in my professional judgment the site posed a risk to future survey teams. I told them it poses no risk whatsoever to teams that respect the boundary, acknowledge what they are approaching, and leave when they are told to leave. I told them it poses a significant and specific risk to teams that do not. They asked me how a team would know where the boundary was. I told them, the site will show you, precisely and clearly, and with increasing specificity, the same way it showed my team. The question is not whether you will see the boundary. The question is whether you are the kind of person who stops when you do. They classified my report. I filed this addendum. I retired from fieldwork the following spring. I teach now, and I tell my students that the most important skill in this work is not technical knowledge or theoretical framework or physical courage. It is the wisdom to recognize when the dig is not yours to complete. Sometimes the site decides when the work is finished. The Cats decided in the 3rd century of the Common Era that the work was not finished. They have not changed their minds. Do not give them a reason to change their approach. This transcript has been released without ministry authorization and without consortium approval. If you find it in the archive and they ask you to refile it under restricted access, do whatever you feel is right. My paperwork is complete. My conscience is clear. What I saw is documented. What the documentation means is yours to carry now. Dr. Nadia Ostrowski, Warsaw, 2003. If you found this file in the archives, subscribe to Vaulted World Secrets so the next sealed record gets unsealed. Someone has to keep these files open. Survival rule. If you are 20 meters underground and the sound that has been present for 12 consecutive days suddenly stops entirely, do not go toward the silence to investigate its source. The silence does not mean it has left. The silence means it has finished warning you and is now simply waiting to see what you do next. Leave immediately. Do not run. Do not leave anything behind. And for reasons you should now understand, do not go without your salt.